My name is Hannah Mercer. I am 32 years old. My mother tried to give part of my liver to her sick husband before I ever said yes. By the time she realized I had kept records, there were 29 pieces of evidence in a Navy medical binder. The first one was a photo of a red hospital bracelet around my wrist. The last one was a hospital note that used one word my family could not erase: coercion. My stepfather, Richard, needed a liver transplant. My mother, Marlene, needed everyone to believe she was the devoted wife who held us together. And for most of my life, I had been the quiet daughter who made things easier. That was why she chose me. Not because I was the only option. Not because I was the best option. Because I had spent 23 years proving I could be pressured without making a scene. Welcome back to Revenge Drama Story. This is where quiet people, painful truths, and real consequences meet. I used to think my mother loved calm children. Now I understand she loved useful ones. My father left when I was 6. I do not remember the final argument clearly. I remember the sound after it. The front door closed. My mother stood in the hallway with one hand on the wall. There was a brown suitcase beside her feet. She did not cry in front of me. She only looked down and said, "Hannah, you and I have to be practical now." Practical became the word she used when something hurt too much to explain. When we moved from our small rental into a smaller apartment, she said we were being practical. When she sold my father's old guitar, she said memories did not pay bills. When I asked if Dad would come back for my birthday, she cut the cake into 2 pieces and said practical girls do not wait for unreliable people. I learned early that sadness made her impatient, so I became easy. I finished homework without being asked. I kept my shoes lined up by the door. I said thank you even when dinner was a microwave tray with cold spots in the middle. When my mother met Richard Hale, I was 9. He was not cruel at first. He was just large, quiet, and already finished with fatherhood before he ever met me. He owned a small construction supply company. He drove a black truck that smelled like leather and peppermint gum. He wore pressed shirts on Sundays and corrected waiters without raising his voice. My mother looked different beside him. Straighter, safer, like a woman who had finally found a wall to stand behind. After they married, we moved into Richard's house. It had a brick mailbox, a formal dining room, and stairs that creaked only at the edges. My mother told me I was lucky. She told me Richard had taken us in. She told me not every man would accept another man's child. I was 9, so I believed her. Gratitude became the price of living there. At dinner, Richard sat at the head of the table. My mother sat to his right. I sat closest to the kitchen door. There was a heavy silver serving spoon that belonged to Richard's mother. It had a rose pattern on the handle and a small dent near the bowl. My mother always placed it beside my plate. At first, I thought it was because I was helpful. Then I understood the rule. Hannah serves first. Hannah clears plates. Hannah gets up when someone needs water. Hannah does not make guests uncomfortable. Whenever Richard brought home clients or church friends, my mother would glance at the spoon. That was enough. I would stand up, scoop potatoes onto Richard's plate, then my mother's, then the guests'. I served myself last. No one said that part out loud. They did not need to. When Caleb was born, I was 5 days past my 10th birthday. My mother came home from the hospital holding him in a blue blanket. Richard stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder. For the first time, the house felt like it had a center. It was not me. Caleb had Richard's name, Richard's eyes, and Richard's confidence before he could speak. My mother called him our miracle. I was called my little helper. At 10, I liked that title. At 16, I hated it. At 32, I finally understood it. A helper is praised for disappearing into someone else's need. That was what my mother had trained me to do. I do not want to make Richard sound like a monster. He paid for my school supplies. He drove me to dental appointments. He signed permission slips when my mother forgot. But he never looked at me the way he looked at Caleb. When Caleb got a B in science, Richard took him for steak and said, effort mattered. When I graduated with honors, Richard nodded and said college debt was a serious thing. When Caleb crashed Richard's truck at 19, my mother said boys make mistakes. When I asked for help with rent after my first job cut my hours, she asked why I had not planned better. The pattern was not loud. That was why it lasted. It lived in seating charts, in who got defended, in who got asked to understand, in who had to be grateful. By the time I was an adult, I had built a life that required very little from them. I rented a small apartment 15 minutes from the hospital district. I worked as an operations coordinator for a dental equipment supplier. I paid my bills on time. I kept a spare key under a ceramic planter shaped like a rabbit. I called my mother every Sunday at 5. The calls were never long. She talked about Caleb's promotions, Richard's blood pressure, church events, and the neighbors' renovations. When she asked about me, it usually sounded like a courtesy. "Are you still at that same job? Are you seeing anyone? Are you eating properly?" I answered simply, "Yes, no, mostly." Then she would sigh and say I was always so private. The first real warning came in February. Richard had been sick for months, but my mother described it as fatigue. Then one Sunday, her voice changed. She said his liver numbers were worse. She used the words specialist, transplant team, and family testing. I stood in my kitchen holding a mug of tea that had gone cold. She said Caleb was under terrible pressure at work. Then she became quiet. Not sad quiet, strategic quiet. Finally, she said, "Hannah, you have always had a generous heart." I did not answer right away. Outside my window, rain tapped against the fire escape. I remember the sound because my body understood before my mind did. Something was being moved toward me. I asked what she meant. She said no one was asking anything yet. She said the hospital only wanted information. She said family members sometimes get tested to see whether they might be compatible. Then she added, "Richard gave you a home when he did not have to. That was the first time the old debt entered the room." I told her I would read whatever information the hospital provided. I said I was not promising anything. She laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because she had heard the boundary and wanted to make it smaller. "Of course, sweetheart. No one is forcing you." 2 days later, Aunt Joyce texted me, "Your mother told me about the testing. We are all so proud of you." I stared at the message for almost a full minute. Testing was not donation. Information was not consent. Pride was not neutral. I called my mother that evening. She answered on the third ring. In the background, I heard plates and Caleb's voice. I asked what she had told Aunt Joyce. She said she had only said I was willing to help. I told her willing to learn was not the same as willing to donate. Her voice cooled. "Hannah, this is not the time to split hairs." That phrase stayed with me. Split hairs. As if the difference between a conversation and surgery was a tiny thing. The hospital appointment was on a Thursday morning. I took the day off work and drove myself. My mother offered to come, but I said I preferred to go alone. She did not like that. She sent 3 texts before I parked. First, she asked what time I arrived. Then she asked if I wanted her to talk because medical people could be intimidating. Then she wrote, "Please do not make us look divided." I took a screenshot. I did not know why yet. The transplant wing was on the 4th floor. The hallway smelled like sanitizer and coffee. A woman at reception handed me a clipboard and a red hospital bracelet. The bracelet felt too bright against my wrist. It had my name, my date of birth, and a barcode. I took a photo of it while sitting beside a fake plant with dusty leaves. At the time, I thought I was only documenting my own nerves. Later, that photo became the first page of the binder. The coordinator was kind. She explained that living donation was serious. She said testing did not mean approval. Approval did not mean obligation. An obligation had no place in consent. I remember looking up when she said that. She must have noticed. Because she paused. Then she asked if anyone was pressuring me. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. That was how deep the training went. Even alone in a hospital office, I felt disloyal for telling the truth. So I said I was still processing. She wrote something in her notes. I watched the pen move. When I left, I had a folder of medical information, a lab slip, and a sentence repeating in my head. Obligation had no place in consent. In the elevator, my phone lit up. It was a message from the family group chat. My mother had written, "Hannah officially started the donor process today. We are blessed beyond words." There were heart emojis from cousins. Praying hands from Aunt Joyce. Caleb wrote, "Proud of you, sis." I stood between the elevator doors and felt the floor shift under me. Officially started. Donor process. Blessed. She had turned my appointment into an announcement. I typed a reply. Then I deleted it. I typed another one. I deleted that too. Finally, I took a screenshot. When I got home, I placed the hospital folder on my kitchen table. The red bracelet was still around my wrist. I slid a pair of scissors under the plastic and cut it off carefully. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I placed it in a white envelope. Then, I wrote the date on the front. February 8th. I did not know it yet, but that was the day I stopped trusting my mother's version of events. The second warning came 3 nights later. My mother invited me to Sunday dinner. She said Richard wanted family around him. She said Caleb would be there. She said Aunt Joyce might stop by. I asked if this was about the hospital. She said everything was about the hospital now. Then she added, "Try not to come in defensive." That was another old trick. She named my reaction before I had one. Sunday dinner smelled like roast chicken, lemon polish, and Richard's expensive cologne. The dining room looked almost ceremonial. White plates, folded napkins, candles no one had lit. The silver serving spoon lay beside my place setting. Same dent, same rose pattern, same silent instruction, serve first. Feel later. Richard sat in his usual chair, thinner than before. His skin had a yellow undertone. For a moment, I felt real pity. Illness had taken some of his pride from his face. Then Caleb walked in wearing a navy sweater and checked his phone without greeting me. My mother smiled too brightly. She kissed my cheek and whispered, "Tonight is important." I looked at the table. There was a manila envelope beside my plate. My name was written across it in my mother's handwriting. I did not touch it. During dinner, Richard barely spoke. Aunt Joyce talked about church flowers. Caleb complained about his manager. My mother kept looking at the envelope. Finally, when the plates were half cleared, she tapped it with 2 fingers. "Hannah, I printed some things so we can all understand the next steps." I said the hospital had already given me information. She smiled. "This is different." Caleb leaned back in his chair. "Mom just wants everyone on the same page." I opened the envelope. Inside were consent forms. Not informational brochures, not general medical explanations. Forms. There were highlighted sections where signatures belonged. My pulse slowed in a strange way. The room became very clear. The spoon near my plate. The candle wax. The small crack in Richard's water glass. My mother said, "We all know you are going to do the right thing." No one breathed for a second. Then Aunt Joyce reached over and patted my hand. "Your mother has been through so much." I looked at Richard, he looked down at his plate. I looked at Caleb, he said, "Honestly, Hannah, you are the practical choice." I asked what that meant. He shrugged. "You do not have kids. Your job is flexible. Recovery would be easier for you." There it was. My life had been measured and found available. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I slid the forms back into the envelope. Then I said I would not sign anything at a dinner table. My mother's face changed only slightly. A small tightening near her mouth. She said, "No one is asking you to sign tonight." But the pen was already beside the envelope. Black. Uncapped. Pointing toward me. That was when I saw the shape of the plan. They did not want a decision. They wanted a scene where refusal looked cruel. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. Richard flinched at the sound. I picked up my coat and said I was going home. My mother followed me to the hallway. Her voice dropped so only I could hear. "Do not humiliate me in front of my husband." I looked at her. For the first time, I did not apologize. I opened the front door and stepped into the cold. Behind me, I heard her say my name. Not like a mother, like a warning. That night, I started the Navy medical binder. I put the red bracelet envelope inside first, then the screenshot of the family group message, then the photo of the consent forms. Then I wrote one sentence on a plain sheet of paper. I agreed to information only. I read it 3 times. Then I placed it behind the first divider. The binder was almost empty. But for the first time in my life, I had made a place where my version of events could stay untouched. The first voicemail came at 8:14 the next morning. My mother sounded tired but not sorry. "Hannah, I know you were overwhelmed last night. I forgive you for walking out. I saved it." The second voicemail came 9 minutes later. "Richard barely slept. I hope you understand what that means. I saved that too." By noon, there were 7 missed calls. By 12:56, there were 4 texts. The first said, "Please call me." The second said, "You are scaring everyone." The third said, "Your silence is cruel." The fourth said, "You need to remember who gave you a family." That last sentence made my hands go cold. Not because it was new, because it was finally written down. For years, that sentence had lived in tone, timing, and expectation. Now it was evidence. I took screenshots and added them to the binder. I labeled the page, February 12th, "Morning Pressure." At work, I made inventory corrections and answered vendor emails like nothing had changed. That was the strange part about family emergencies. Outside your body, the world keeps moving. Printers jam. Coffee cools. People ask if the order from Cleveland shipped. Inside your body, a door has opened. Behind it is everything you tried not to know. At 3 in the afternoon, Caleb texted me, "Mom is a wreck. You need to fix this." I asked him what he meant by fix. He replied, "Stop making this about you." Then he added, "Dad does not have unlimited time." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I typed, "Have you been tested?" The 3 dots appeared. They disappeared. They appeared again. Finally, he wrote, "My situation is complicated." I saved that screenshot too. That evening, Aunt Joyce called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was soft and trembling. "Hannah, honey, your mother is under a terrible strain. I know surgery sounds frightening, but sometimes family has to step forward. You do not want to live with regret." There was a pause. Then she added something quieter. "And you know Caleb is not really in a place to handle this." I replayed that part 3 times. Caleb was not in a place. I apparently was. Even my fear had been assigned less value. I put the voicemail file into a folder on my laptop. Then I wrote down the exact time. 6:38 in the evening. The binder had 9 items by midnight. By the end of the week, it had 14. I did not set out to build a case. At first, I only wanted to keep myself from being confused. That is what manipulation does best. It makes you lose the order of things. Who said what, when they said it, what you agreed to, what they added later. So I made the order visible. Each page had a date. Each screenshot had a note. Each voicemail had a timestamp. I printed everything at the office supply store on Saturday morning. The young man behind the counter asked if I wanted color copies. I said only for the hospital bracelet photo. It seemed important that the red stayed red. On Monday, the transplant coordinator called. Her name was Paula. She said they needed to schedule a follow-up conversation. Then her voice changed. She asked if I was in a place where I could speak privately. I walked into the supply closet at work and closed the door. There was a stack of shipping boxes behind me. I said yes. Paula said a note had been entered after my first appointment. She said the team wanted to make sure I understood that testing was voluntary. I said I did. Then she asked if my family believed I had already agreed to donation. My throat tightened. I looked down at the floor. Someone had spilled toner near the printer paper. A fine gray dust marked the tile. I said yes. Paula did not sound surprised. She only said, "Thank you for telling me." Then she asked if I wanted to continue the donor evaluation. The old Hannah would have asked what my mother wanted. The old Hannah would have asked whether stopping would hurt Richard's chances. The old Hannah would have apologized before answering. Instead, I said, "I do not know." Paula said, "That was a complete answer." Then she explained something that changed the story. Before I could be considered as a living donor, I would meet with an independent living donor advocate. That person was not there for Richard. Not for my mother. Not for the family. For me. I wrote those words on a sticky note. For me. The appointment was set for Friday morning. My mother found out before I told her. That meant someone in the family had been asking questions, or she had called the hospital herself. At 7:20 that night, she texted me, "Why are they saying you need a private advocate?" I did not answer. Then she wrote, "We are your family. You do not need strangers putting ideas in your head." I added the screenshot to the binder. Item 15. The next day, Richard called me directly. That was unusual. He rarely called unless my mother had told him to. His voice sounded thin. "Hannah, your mother says you are nervous." I stood by my apartment window and watched a delivery truck idle at the curb. I said I was concerned. He sighed. "I know this is not easy. For 1 second, I thought he might say something kind." Then he said, "But life is not always about comfort." There it was again. A soft sentence with a hook inside it. I asked him if he wanted me to donate even if I felt pressured. He was silent. Not long. Maybe 4 seconds. But it told me more than any answer. Finally, he said, "I think your mother is trying to keep this family from falling apart." I said, "That is not what I asked." His breathing changed. Then he said he was tired and ended the call. I wrote down the time. Tuesday, 7:41 in the evening. Richard avoided direct consent question. I did not record that call. In my state, I knew recording laws could be complicated, so I wrote a contemporaneous note instead. Those were Miguel Santos's words later. Contemporaneous note. A note written at the time. Not weeks later. Not after memory had softened. At the time. I did not know the legal word yet. I only knew I needed the truth to stay still. Friday morning, I drove to the hospital alone. The sky was low and gray. The red bracelet from the first appointment was in the binder inside my tote bag. I did not wear jewelry. I did not want anything touching my wrists. Dr. Elise Warren met me in a small office with no windows. She wore a navy blazer and a hospital badge. Her voice was calm, but not soft. There is a difference. Soft can be pushed around. Calm is harder to move. Miguel Santos sat beside her with a tablet and a yellow legal pad. He introduced himself as the transplant social worker. Dr. Warren explained her role first. She said living donation had to be voluntary. She said I could stop at any point. She said the hospital could record me as unsuitable without giving my family private details. Then she said, "Our job is not to persuade you. Our job is to protect your consent." I looked down at my hands. My fingernails were pressed into my palms. She noticed. She gave me time. No one in my family ever did that. They filled silence quickly. With guilt. With instructions. With history. Dr. Warren let silence be mine. Finally, I said, "I need to show you something." I opened the navy binder. I expected to feel embarrassed. Instead, I felt steady. I showed her the family group message. Then the texts. Then the photo of the consent forms at dinner. Then the voicemail log. Miguel asked if he could take notes. I said yes. Dr. Warren read quietly. Her face did not change much. That made me trust her more. She was not performing shock for me. She was assessing facts. When she reached my mother's text about strangers putting ideas in my head, she stopped. She read it twice. Then she asked, "Did you feel free to say no before today?" My eyes filled. I hated that. I had wanted to be composed, but the question touched the part of me that had been holding up the ceiling. I said, "Number?" The word was small. It still changed everything. Miguel wrote something down. Dr. Warren slid a box of tissues toward me. She did not say my mother loved me in her own way. She did not say stress makes people act badly. She did not say I should consider Richard's feelings. She said, "Thank you for answering clearly." That sentence felt like a handrail. For the next hour they asked careful questions. Had anyone threatened to cut me off? Had anyone promised money? Had anyone told me I would be responsible if Richard declined? Had anyone minimized the risks? Had anyone made plans as though my decision was already made? I answered each question. Some answers were yes. Some were not exactly. Some were, I do not know. No one rushed me. At the end, Dr. Warren said the donor process would not move forward unless I independently and consistently expressed consent. Then she added, "Based on what you have shown us, we have serious concerns about family coercion." There was the word. Coercion. Not drama, not sensitivity, not selfishness. Coercion. Miguel said they would document the concerns in the appropriate part of the file. He also said my family did not have the right to attend my donor meetings. He said Marlene could not receive updates about my donor evaluation without my permission. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because my whole childhood could have used that sentence. Your mother does not have automatic access to you. When I left the hospital, I sat in my car for 11 minutes. I did not turn on the engine. I only held the steering wheel and breathed. The binder sat on the passenger seat. It was heavier now. Not because of paper, because someone official had looked at it and not called me cruel. Before I drove home, I took the red bracelet envelope from the binder. I opened it. The plastic strip lay curled inside like a small red warning. I touched it once, then I put it back. That night, I did not call my mother. She called me. Then she called again. Then Caleb called. Then Aunt Joyce. By 10:30, I had 16 missed calls. My mother left one voicemail. Her voice was no longer tired. It was sharp. "Hannah, I do not know what you said to those people, but you are creating obstacles your stepfather may not survive. If you wanted attention, you have it." I saved it. Then she sent a family group message. "I know everyone is worried. Hannah has become emotionally overwhelmed and confused by hospital staff. Please pray that she remembers who she is." That was the start of the counterattack. She did not say I refused, not yet. She said I was confused. That was smarter. A confused woman does not need to be believed. A confused woman can be managed. A confused woman can be spoken for. Within 20 minutes, relatives began texting me. One cousin wrote, "Your mom says you are spiraling." Another wrote, "Please do not punish Richard for old childhood stuff." Aunt Joyce wrote, "This is not the Hannah I know." I wanted to respond. I wanted to send every screenshot. I wanted to say, "You never knew me. You knew the version who carried plates." Instead, I made a folder called Family Narrative. Then I saved every message. By midnight, the binder had 22 items. On Saturday morning, Caleb came to my apartment. He did not ask first. He knocked hard enough that my neighbor opened her door. When I looked through the peephole, he was standing with both hands in his jacket pockets. I opened the door, only as far as the chain allowed. He looked offended by the chain. "Seriously?" I said. "What do you need?" He lowered his voice. "Mom is falling apart." I said, "Then you should be with her?" His jaw tightened. "You are making this ugly." I looked at my half-brother. The miracle baby. The practical son. The man who had called me the practical choice. I asked again if he had been tested. He looked down the hallway. Then he said, "This is not about me." I said, "It sounds exactly about you." His face flushed. He stepped closer. The chain pulled against the door. "I did not move," Caleb said. "You have always acted like you are better than us because you are quiet." That almost made me smile. Quiet had never protected me from blame. It had only made blame easier to deliver. I said, "I am not discussing this at my door." Then he said something I wrote down as soon as he left. "Dad raised you. The least you can do is give something back." I closed the door. My hands shook after the lock turned. Not before. Before, I was steady. After, my body admitted what had happened. I sat on the floor with my back against the door and wrote the words in my phone. Saturday, 9:22 in the morning. Caleb came to apartment uninvited. Asked if tested. He avoided answering. Said, "Dad raised you. The least you can do is give something back." Then I called the hospital. I left a message for Miguel. I said family members were coming to my home. I said I did not feel unsafe, but I felt pressured. I chose my words carefully. Not unsafe. Pressured. Facts mattered. By Monday, Miguel called back. He said he had added my report to the file. Then he asked a question I had not expected. Had Caleb ever been invited for compatibility screening? I said I did not know. Miguel said he could not share private medical details. Then he paused. He said sometimes families create pressure around one person while other possible donors remain unexplored. He did not give me Caleb's records, he did not violate privacy, but he gave me a direction. That evening, Aunt Joyce called again. "This time," I answered. She sounded relieved. "Hannah, thank goodness." I said, "Aunt Joyce, did Caleb ever agree to testing?" Silence. I waited. She said, "That is complicated." Everyone loved that word. Complicated meant inconvenient truth. Complicated meant stop asking. I said nothing. She sighed. "Your mother said Caleb was not emotionally suited for it." I asked what that meant. She lowered her voice. She said you were steadier. Easier to talk to. Less likely to panic. My chest went quiet. Easier to talk to. That was the family translation. Easier to guilt. I asked Aunt Joyce to repeat what my mother said exactly. She resisted at first. Then she said, "Marlene said Caleb would fall apart, but Hannah would do what needed to be done." I thanked her. She sounded confused. I ended the call and wrote it down immediately. Then I emailed myself the note. Then I printed it the next morning. Item 24. On Wednesday, the truth about Caleb became clearer. Not from the hospital. From Caleb himself. He texted me at lunch. "I hope you are happy. Now Mom wants me to get screened again." Again. That one word mattered. I replied, "Again?" He did not answer for 37 minutes. Then he wrote, "I had reasons before." I saved the screenshot. Item 25. By then, I no longer felt like I was gathering paper. I felt like I was mapping a room everyone else had kept dark. My mother had not chosen me because there were no alternatives. She had chosen me because I was the path of least resistance. Caleb was protected from fear. I was assigned usefulness. Richard was protected from discomfort. I was assigned guilt. Marlene was protected from shame. I was assigned silence. But the binder kept growing. And silence, once documented, becomes something else. It becomes a record. The official procedure began on a Thursday afternoon. Not in a courtroom. Not with a dramatic confrontation. It began with a plain email from Miguel Santos. The subject line was simple. Follow-up regarding donor evaluation. I opened it at my kitchen table. My tea sat untouched beside my laptop. Miguel asked me to confirm whether I wanted all donor-related contact to go only through me. He also asked whether I wanted Marlene removed from any non-recipient communication. I read that sentence 4 times. Removed. not argued with, not begged, removed. A procedure existed for a boundary my family had treated as impossible. I replied carefully. I wrote that I did not authorize my mother to receive updates about my donor evaluation. I wrote that I did not consent to family participation in my donor discussions. I wrote that I wanted all communication sent only to me. Before pressing send, I checked every sentence. No anger, no accusation, no explanation they could twist. Only facts. Then I sent it. 3 hours later, my mother called 14 times. I did not answer. At 6:17, she left a voicemail. Her voice was quiet now. That scared me more than shouting would have. Hannah, I just got off the phone with the hospital. I do not know what you are trying to prove, but you have embarrassed me in front of professionals. There was a pause. Then she said, "You have no idea what you are doing to this family." I saved it as item 26. The next day, Paula called. She confirmed that donor communication restrictions were now noted. She spoke gently, but the words were formal. She said the transplant team could not move forward with me as a donor, while serious coercion concerns remained. I asked what that meant for Richard. She said Richard's care team would continue managing his case. She said other options could be explored. She did not tell me I had ruined his life. She did not tell me I was brave. She stayed inside procedure. That helped. Because procedure did not need me to be perfect. It only needed the truth to be clear. On Saturday, my mother changed tactics. She stopped texting me directly. Instead, she used other people. A cousin sent me a long message about forgiveness. A church friend sent a paragraph about honoring parents. A woman I had not seen since Caleb's graduation wrote that organ donation was the highest form of love. I wondered what my mother had told them. Then I found out. Aunt Joyce accidentally forwarded me a message meant for someone else. It was from my mother. It said Hannah was ready to help until hospital staff made her paranoid. She has always had abandonment issues, and now she is using Richard's illness to punish me. I sat on the edge of my bed and read it twice. Abandonment issues. She had taken the wound she helped create and used it as a weapon. For a minute, I could not move. Then my phone buzzed again. Aunt Joyce wrote, "I am sorry. That was not meant for you." I typed, "I know." Then I saved both messages. Item 27. That night, I dreamed of the silver serving spoon. In the dream, it was longer than my arm. My mother kept placing it beside me. Every time I moved away, it followed. I woke at 4:12 in the morning with my heart pounding. The apartment was dark. The radiator clicked near the wall. For a few seconds, I was 9 years old again. Then I saw the navy binder on my desk. I was not 9. I was 32. I had a locked door. I had written records. I had an advocate. I got up and made coffee. I did not call my mother. The hospital family meeting was my mother's idea. She called it a clarity meeting. She said everyone needed to stop misunderstanding each other. She wanted Richard's transplant coordinator there. She wanted Caleb there. She wanted Aunt Joyce there. She wanted me there. At first, I said no. Then Dr. Warren called and explained that I did not have to attend. She said no meeting could force me into donor participation. She said if I chose to attend, I could leave at any time. I asked whether she would be there. She said yes. I asked whether Miguel would be there. She said yes. Then I asked if I could bring my binder. There was a small silence. Then she said, if you choose to bring records that help you speak clearly, that is appropriate. Speak clearly. Not defend myself. Not win. Speak clearly. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday at 3. I arrived 20 minutes early. The hospital conference room was near the transplant wing. It had a long table, 12 chairs, and a muted television mounted on the wall. A projector sat at one end, humming softly. There were paper coffee cups stacked beside a metal urn. The room smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. I chose a seat near the door. That was not an accident. I placed the navy binder on the table in front of me. My hands rested on top of it. The binder had 29 items now. The last 2 were my mother's voicemail about embarrassment and the forwarded message about abandonment issues. I had printed a table of contents, not because I expected to read everything, because order kept me steady. Dr. Warren arrived first. She greeted me without touching me. I appreciated that. Miguel came next, carrying his tablet and a yellow pad. Then Paula entered with a folder. She looked serious. Not cold. Serious. At 3 exactly, my mother came in, pushing Richard in a wheelchair. Richard looked smaller than he had at dinner. His robe hung loose around his shoulders. For a moment, grief moved through me. Not guilt. Grief. There is a difference. Guilt says you caused someone suffering. Grief says suffering exists and it hurts to see. Caleb walked behind them. Aunt Joyce followed with her church handbag clutched in both hands. My mother saw the binder immediately. Her eyes moved to it. Then to me. Then to Dr. Warren. Her smile tightened. She took the chair opposite me. Richard sat beside her. Caleb stayed standing until my mother looked at him. Then he sat. Nobody spoke for a moment. The projector hummed. A paper cup tipped slightly near the coffee urn. Miguel began by explaining the purpose of the meeting. He said Richard's medical care remained the priority of Richard's care team. He said donor evaluation was separate. He said living donation required voluntary and independent consent. My mother interrupted. Of course, we all understand consent. Dr. Warren looked at her. Then she said, "Please let him finish." My mother's face went still. Miguel continued. He said no family member could pressure, manage, or represent a potential donor's decision. He said emotional pressure could affect donor suitability. Caleb shifted in his chair. My mother folded her hands. Then she said, "I think this has been exaggerated." She turned to Paula. "Hannah has been under stress for years. She sometimes interprets concern as pressure." I felt the old pull, the need to correct her, the need to say, "That is not true," the need to prove I was reasonable. Instead, I opened the binder. The rings clicked softly. Everyone heard it. I turned to the first divider. I said, "I would like to speak clearly." Dr. Warren nodded. My mother said, "Hannah, do not make this theatrical." I looked at her. Then I looked back down at the page. I said, "On February 8th, I attended an informational appointment. I did not consent to donation." I slid forward a copy of the hospital bracelet photo. The red looked bright against the white paper. I said, "That same morning, Mom told the family I had officially started the donor process." I slid forward the screenshot. No one reached for it at first. Then Aunt Joyce leaned forward, her lips parted slightly. My mother said, "That was shorthand." I turned to the second page. I said, "On February 11th, consent forms were placed beside my dinner plate. I had not requested them. I had not agreed to sign them." I placed the photo of the manila envelope on the table. Caleb looked away. Richard closed his eyes. My mother said, "It was a family discussion." I said, "There was an uncapped pen beside the forms." No one answered. I turned another page. I said, "From February 12th to February 19th, I received repeated messages describing me as cruel, confused, selfish, and responsible for Richard's outcome." My mother's face flushed. "That is not fair." I did not look at her. I said, "I have 7 voicemails from Mom in 42 minutes. Miguel asked, "Hannah, would you like to play one?" I looked at Dr. Warren. She nodded once. I took out my phone. My thumb did not shake. That surprised me. I played the voicemail from the morning after dinner. My mother's voice filled the conference room. Richard barely slept. "I hope you understand what that means." The sound seemed smaller coming from my phone, less powerful, almost ugly in its plainness. When it ended, no one spoke. The projector kept humming. A cart rolled somewhere in the hallway. I turned another page. I said, "Caleb also pressured me while avoiding his own testing." Caleb sat up. "That is private." I said, "Your private medical information is private. Your messages to me are not." Then I read his text aloud. "Mom is a wreck. You need to fix this." I read the next one. "Stop making this about you." Then I read my question. "Have you been tested?" Then his answer. "My situation is complicated." Caleb's mouth tightened. He looked at Richard, then at the table. My mother said, "Caleb's circumstances were different." Dr. Warren spoke then. "Mrs. Hale, please do not discuss another person's medical suitability here." My mother seemed startled by the correction. She was used to being the one who corrected rooms. I turned to item 25. I said, "On March 1st, Caleb texted me that Mom wanted him to get screened again. Again means this had been discussed before." Caleb said nothing. Aunt Joyce pressed her fingers to her mouth. Richard opened his eyes. For the first time, he looked at Caleb. Not at me, at Caleb. The room shifted. It was almost invisible. But I felt it. The story my mother had built was losing weight on one side. I turned to the final divider. I said, "The last item is not about donation. It is about why I no longer trust the family narrative." My mother leaned forward. "Hannah, enough." Her voice cracked. Not from sorrow, from losing control. I looked at Dr. Warren. She said, "You may continue." I read the forwarded message aloud. Hannah was ready to help until hospital staff made her paranoid. She has always had abandonment issues, and now she is using Richard's illness to punish me. Aunt Joyce whispered, "Marlene." My mother's eyes cut toward her. I placed the page down, then I closed the binder. The sound was soft. Still, everyone looked at it. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then Richard shifted in his wheelchair. The wheel made a small rubber sound against the floor. He looked at my mother. "Marlene, is that what you told people?" My mother did not answer him. She looked at me. Her face had changed completely. The public softness was gone. So was the tired wife. What remained was older, colder. She said, "I was trying to save my husband." Dr. Warren said, "No one is questioning the seriousness of his illness." My mother snapped, "You do not understand this family." Then she turned back to me. "All you had to do was help." The room went still. I did not speak. No one did. The silence lasted 19 seconds. I know because I looked at the clock above the television. The second hand moved slowly. 1, 2, 3. My mother's breathing grew louder. 9, 10, 11. Caleb stared at the table. Aunt Joyce stared at my mother. Richard stared at me. 17, 18, 19. Then my mother said the sentence that ended everything. "I did not raise you so your body could be yours when we needed it." No one moved. Even my mother seemed to hear it after she said it. The words stayed in the room. They did not need interpretation. They did not need evidence. They explained every page in the binder. Dr. Warren's expression did not change. But her voice became firmer. "Mrs. Hale, that statement is deeply concerning." Miguel wrote something down. Paula looked at her folder. Aunt Joyce whispered my name. I did not answer. I was looking at my mother. For the first time, I did not see a powerful woman. I saw a frightened one. Not frightened of losing me, frightened of losing ownership. Richard lowered his head. Caleb rubbed his face with both hands. My mother tried to recover. She said, "You are twisting my words." But no one helped her. That was the first real consequence. Not legal, not medical, social. The room did not rush to protect her version. Dr. Warren asked me one question. Hannah, do you currently consent to continue as a living donor candidate? My answer was clear. No, she nodded. Then she said thank you. Miguel said the team would document that I did not consent to proceed. He also said the existing coercion concerns would remain in the file. Paula explained that Richard's recipient care would continue separately. She said no further donor-related communication would be directed through Marlene. My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. She said, "This is outrageous." Dr. Warren remained seated. She said, "This meeting is over." 3 plain words. No shouting, no threat. But my mother stopped. Because hospitals understand something families often pretend not to know. A boundary does not become real because the loudest person accepts it. It becomes real when the right person enforces it. My mother left first. She did not ask whether Richard needed help. She did not look at Caleb. She picked up her handbag, pulled her coat over one arm, and walked out of the conference room. The door closed behind her with a soft click. That sound felt more final than shouting would have. Richard remained in the wheelchair. For a moment he looked older than 64. His hand rested on the armrest. The skin over his knuckles looked thin and pale. He did not apologize. I want to be honest about that. There was no sudden speech. No tearful confession. No perfect moment where the man who had never chosen me finally did. He only looked at the binder. Then he looked at me. After a long silence, he said, "I did not know she said it like that." I believed him. And I did not. Because maybe he had not known every word. But he had known the direction. He had known my mother was pushing. He had known Caleb was being protected. He had known I was sitting alone, under the weight of everyone's expectation. A person can benefit from pressure without giving the order. I said, "Now you do." He lowered his eyes. That was all. Caleb stood up next. He looked angry at first. Then embarrassed. Then young. Younger than 27. He said, "I did not ask her to do that." I said, "You did not stop her either." His mouth opened. Then it closed. He looked at Aunt Joyce. She did not rescue him. That was new too. Aunt Joyce sat with her handbag in her lap. Her fingers were wrapped around the handle so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She whispered, "I am sorry, Hannah." I nodded once. I did not comfort her. That was another boundary. Sometimes people apologize because they are sorry. Sometimes they apologize because they cannot bear the discomfort of seeing themselves clearly. I did not know which one Aunt Joyce meant yet, so I left the apology where she placed it. On the table. Not in my arms. Dr. Warren walked me to the hallway. The hospital lights made everything look flat and honest. She said the team would update my donor file. She said the coercion concerns would remain documented. She said if any family member contacted me in a way that felt threatening, I should keep the records. Then she paused. "Hannah, you did what you needed to do." I nodded. I could not speak. Miguel handed me a printed summary of the next steps. It was only 1 page. No dramatic language. No emotional praise. Just procedure. Donor evaluation not proceeding. Communication restrictions confirmed. Family coercion concerns documented. I folded the paper and placed it inside the navy binder. Item 30. I had planned on 29. But truth has a way of adding one last page. In the parking garage, I sat in my car and cried for the first time. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that my breath kept catching. I cried because Richard was still sick. I cried because my mother had said the quiet part in front of everyone. I cried because a hospital had protected me more clearly than my own family ever had. Then I wiped my face with a fast food napkin from the glove compartment. I drove home slowly. At a red light, my phone lit up. It was my mother. I did not answer. Then came a text. "You have destroyed this family." I looked at it once. Then I saved the screenshot. Not because I needed more evidence, because old habits do not disappear in one afternoon. But this time I did not feel confused. That was the difference. 3 days later, the family group chat went silent. Not because they all understood, because no one knew what story was safe to repeat. Marlene had told them I was unstable. Then she had exposed herself in a room with hospital staff. She had told them I was confused. Then the binder showed dates, messages, and voicemails. She had told them I was punishing Richard. Then Caleb's own texts showed he had avoided screening while pushing me. The story did not collapse all at once. It folded inward, one corner at a time. A cousin sent me a short message. I did not know there were consent forms at dinner. I did not reply. A church friend deleted her paragraph about honoring parents. Aunt Joyce called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. Her second message was different. She said, "I should have spoken up sooner. I saved it." But I did not call back. Marlene tried once more. She came to my apartment on a rainy Tuesday evening. This time I did not open the door. Through the peephole, I saw her standing under the hallway light. Her blonde gray hair was damp near her temples. She looked smaller outside my home. Less polished. More human. For a second, pity rose in me. Then she knocked again. "Hannah, open the door." I stood still. The chain was locked. The deadbolt was turned. My phone was recording audio on the kitchen counter. Not secretly for revenge. For safety. She said, "I am your mother." I placed my hand on the door. Not to open it, only to feel the wood between us. Then I said, "You need to leave." Her face changed through the small glass circle. She said, "So this is who you are now?" I said yes. One word. No explanation. She waited. Maybe she expected more. The old Hannah would have filled that silence. The old Hannah would have opened the door. The old Hannah would have said she was sorry for hurting everyone. I did not. After 40 seconds, she walked away. I listened to her footsteps fade down the hall. Then, I breathed out. That night, I wrote a message. I sent it to my mother, Richard, Caleb, and Aunt Joyce. It was short. I said I would not discuss donation again. I said I would not attend family meetings about Richard's medical care. I said any future contact needed to be respectful and written. I said if anyone came to my apartment without invitation again, I would not open the door. I read the message 10 times before sending it. It sounded cold. Then I realized something. Clear often sounds cold to people who benefited from confusion. I pressed send. Caleb replied first. "Whatever." Aunt Joyce replied, "I understand." Richard replied the next morning. He wrote only 6 words. "I will respect what you wrote." My mother did not reply. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing from her. Those 2 weeks were strange. Peace did not feel peaceful at first. It felt like waiting for a dropped plate to hit the floor. I checked my phone too often. I woke before my alarm. I carried the navy binder from room to room. It sat on my kitchen table while I ate toast. It sat beside my laptop while I worked from home. It sat on the chair near my bed. I hated how much comfort it gave me. I hated that paper felt safer than family. One Saturday morning, I cleaned my apartment. Not because it was dirty, because I needed to move. I washed the mugs, I folded laundry, I threw away old receipts. Then I opened the drawer where I had placed the red hospital bracelet. The white envelope was still there. February 8th was written across the front. My handwriting looked tense. I took it to the kitchen table and opened it. The bracelet slid out. A thin, red strip of plastic. So ordinary, so small. It was less than 10 inches long. I thought about how something that small had carried so much. At first, it had been an appointment marker. Then, evidence. Then a warning. Now, in my own kitchen, it was something else. Proof that I had been there. Proof that I had not imagined the pressure. Proof that I had walked into a hospital as someone's expected sacrifice and walked out as myself. I placed the bracelet inside a clear sleeve in the binder, behind item 1. Then I closed the rings. After that, I did something practical. I took the navy binder to the hall closet. There was a high shelf I almost never used. I had to stand on a chair to reach it. I placed the binder there. Not hidden, not destroyed. Just put away. That mattered. Recovery did not mean pretending nothing happened. It meant the evidence no longer had to sit beside my dinner plate. The next Sunday at 5, my phone did not ring. For years, that time had belonged to my mother. At 4:58, I noticed the silence. At 5, I stood in my kitchen. At 5:03, I opened a drawer and took out a wooden spoon I had bought that morning. It was simple. Light brown. No rose pattern. No silver shine. No family history pressed into the handle. I stirred soup in a small pot. Carrots, celery, chicken. Nothing impressive. Nothing ceremonial. Steam rose against the window. Rain blurred the glass. For the first time in weeks, the apartment smelled like ordinary life. I thought about the silver serving spoon in Richard's dining room. The one my mother had placed beside me for years. I wondered if it was still there. Beside an empty chair. I did not want it. I did not need to take it back. Some objects belong to the life that taught you a lesson. Others belong to the life you build after learning it. The wooden spoon was mine. So was the door. So was the silence. So was my body. Richard remained on the transplant list. I heard that through Aunt Joyce months later. He was still receiving care. Caleb eventually completed screening. I do not know the result. I did not ask. That was not cruelty. That was separation. For most of my life, I had been trained to believe every family crisis was also my assignment. Now I understood that compassion and ownership are not the same thing. I could hope Richard received care. I could hope Caleb grew up. I could hope my mother faced herself one day. But I did not have to hand them my body to prove my heart was good. Marlene and I did not reconcile. Not in the way people like to imagine. There was no tearful kitchen conversation. No holiday miracle. No sudden softness that repaired 23 years of training. She sent one card in the mail. There was no return address. Inside, she wrote, "I hope you are satisfied. I read it once. Then I placed it in the binder on the high shelf. I did not make it item 31. It did not deserve a number. Some things are not evidence anymore. They are reminders. I changed my emergency contact at work. I updated my medical forms. I removed my mother from every document where I had left her name out of habit. That part hurt more than I expected. A form can look simple until you realize it contains your last illusion. Mother. Phone number. Relationship. Emergency contact. I crossed her out. Then I wrote my friend Leah's name instead. Leah was the person who brought me groceries after the hospital meeting. She did not ask for the whole story. She only placed oranges, soup, and tissues on my counter. Then she said, "You do not have to explain before you eat." That was love. Not ownership. Not performance. Not a debt with a ribbon around it. Just care. A month after the hospital meeting, I drove past Richard's neighborhood by accident. There was road work on my usual route. The detour took me near the brick mailbox and the formal dining room windows. For a moment, my chest tightened. I saw the house where I learned to serve first and eat last. The house where gratitude became a leash. The house where a silver spoon taught me my place before I knew the word boundary. I slowed at the corner. Then I kept driving. I did not stop. I did not need to see whether my mother was home. I did not need to prove I was strong by facing the driveway. Sometimes recovery is not a speech. Sometimes it is the quiet turn of a steering wheel. At home, I made tea. I stood by the window while it steeped. The navy binder was still on the high shelf. The red bracelet was inside it. The wooden spoon rested beside the stove. 3 objects. One from the hospital, one from the evidence, one from the life after. I used to think revenge meant making people feel what they made you feel. Now I think the quietest revenge is refusing to become the role they wrote for you. My mother wanted a daughter who could be spent. The hospital file recorded a different truth. I was a person, I had consent, I had records, I had a door that locked. If you have ever been called selfish for protecting something that should have been yours from the beginning, I hope you remember this. A boundary does not need to sound warm to be right. A no does not become cruel because someone needed a yes. And love that requires you to disappear is not love, it is hunger. My name is Hannah Mercer. I am 32 years old. My mother tried to give part of my liver to her sick husband before I ever said yes. But the red bracelet was no longer a mark of what they almost took. It became the first boundary I ever kept. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to stay silent until the truth could speak for itself? Subscribe to Revenge Drama Story for more stories about family betrayal, quiet justice, and the peace that comes after the truth.